I don't know why I was drawn to that old house. Maybe it was the way the paint peeled off in long, ragged strips, or the way the wind howled through the broken windows. Or perhaps it was the simple fact that it sat at the end of a long, deserted road, a solitary and eerie beacon in the middle of nowhere. Regardless of the reason, I found myself standing in front of it one foggy evening, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, but then curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed open the creaking front door. The inside of the house was even more dilapidated than the outside. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly curtains. I wandered through the rooms, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The house was empty, save for the faint sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance. As I explored deeper into the house, I began to feel a sense of unease. The air seemed to grow colder, and I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper on the wind. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But then I heard it again, more clearly this time. "Get out," the voice whispered. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one there, but I knew that I wasn't alone. I turned to leave, but the door behind me was locked. Panic set in as I realized that I was trapped. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but there was no answer. As darkness enveloped the house, I heard a noise from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps. I froze, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, I heard a door creak open. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I backed away, bumping into a piece of furniture. It crashed to the floor, the sound echoing through the silent house. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. I could hear the footsteps now, descending the stairs. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy. Terror gripped me. I fumbled for my phone, desperately searching for the flashlight app. My fingers trembled as I finally managed to turn it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the hallway. And there she was. An old woman, her face pale and gaunt, stood at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes, hollow and black, were fixed on me. She raised a skeletal hand, her fingers gnarled and twisted. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the darkness. I turned and ran, stumbling over furniture and tripping down the stairs. I scrambled to my feet and ran towards the front door, but it was still locked. I was trapped. The old woman's laughter echoed through the house, a chilling, guttural sound. I could feel her presence behind me, her icy breath on my neck. Then silence. I held my breath, listening intently. But there was no sound, not even the sound of my own heartbeat. Slowly, I turned around. The old woman was gone, but I knew she was still there, watching me. I slumped to the floor, my body trembling uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to escape. And then I heard a whisper. "You can't escape," it hissed. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But nothing happened. I opened my eyes cautiously. The house was still dark, silent. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear. But eventually I heard a sound. It was the sound of rain. The rain was falling outside, washing away the dust and the shadows. I looked up at the window. The rain was beating against the glass, a steady rhythm in the darkness. And then I heard a sound. It was the sound of a key turning in the lock. The front door creaked open. A sliver of light pierced the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. I stumbled towards the door, my hand outstretched. As I stepped out into the rain, I looked back at the house. The old woman was standing in the window, watching me. Her eyes, hollow and black, were filled with a chilling satisfaction. And then she vanished. I ran from the house, never looking back. I never went back to that road again. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the sound of her laughter, echoing in the wind. And I know that she is still there waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in fear. But eventually I heard a sound. It was the sound of rain. The rain was falling outside, washing away the dust and the shadows. I looked up at the window. The rain was beating against the glass, a steady rhythm in the darkness. And then I heard a sound. It was the sound of a key turning in the lock. The front door creaked open. A sliver of light pierced the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. I stumbled towards the door, my hand outstretched. As I stepped out into the rain, I looked back at the house. The old woman was standing in the window, watching me. Her eyes, hollow and black, were filled with a chilling satisfaction. And then she vanished. I ran from the house, never looking back. I never went back to that road again. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the sound of her laughter, echoing in the wind. And I know that she is still there waiting. For someone else. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of my encounter. But the chilling memory of the old woman's eyes remained, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. I never truly escaped that house. It haunted my dreams, whispering secrets in the darkness. I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, convinced that she was watching me, waiting for the opportunity to claim another victim. The world felt different now, more sinister, more dangerous. The shadows seemed to deepen, the whispers to grow louder. I was no longer the same person I was before I entered that old house. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would never be the same again. Night fishing had always been my escape. There was something calming about the solitude, the rhythmic sound of the water against the boat, and the promise of a big catch lurking in the darkness. I wasn't much of a thrill seeker, but the quiet, eerie allure of late-night trips always drew me in. That's why I said yes when my old friend Nathan suggested we check out Blackstone Lake. Nathan and I hadn't seen each other in years, but we'd grown up fishing together, so the idea of reuniting over our favorite pastime sounded perfect. Blackstone, though, had a reputation. The locals whispered about odd lights and the occasional disappearance. Nathan brushed it off as superstition. The only thing scary out there is how big the fish are, he joked. We arrived at the lake just after 10 p.m. It was far from civilization, the kind of place where the only light came from the moon and stars. We loaded our gear into Nathan's small aluminum boat and pushed off from the creaky wooden dock. The air was still, heavy, and the water was so calm it looked like glass. The only sounds were the faint buzz of insects and the occasional splash of something breaking the surface. We paddled out to the center of the lake, far from the shore, where the water was deepest. Nathan turned off the small motor, and we let the boat drift. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. He cracked a joke about us catching the lake's monster, but his laughter quickly faded into the quiet. We cast our lines and waited. The first hour was uneventful. We chatted about old times, the kind of easy, nostalgic banter that makes you forget how much time has passed. But then, around midnight, I noticed something odd. The air had gotten colder, much colder. My breath was visible in the beam of Nathan's flashlight. "Do you feel that?" I asked, pulling my jacket tighter. Nathan nodded, but he didn't say anything. He was staring at the water. "What's wrong?" I followed his gaze. The surface of the lake had changed. It was rippling, but there was no wind, no movement in the air. The ripples grew, spreading out in perfect, concentric circles from the center of the lake. "Probably just a big fish," Nathan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The ripples stopped as suddenly as they'd started. For a long moment, we just sat there, staring at the still water. Then my line jerked. It wasn't the usual tug of a fish. It felt stronger, more deliberate. "I think I've got something," I said, gripping my rod tightly as the reel spun wildly. Nathan leaned over to help me, his own line forgotten. Whatever was on the other end was massive. It pulled with a force I'd never felt before, nearly yanking the rod out of my hands. I gritted my teeth, trying to keep control, but the line was dragging us toward the center of the lake. "Nate, cut the line!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. He hesitated, then reached for his knife. But before he could sever it, the boat lurched violently, throwing us both off balance. The rod snapped, and I fell hard against the side of the boat. When I looked up, Nathan was staring at the water with wide, terrified eyes. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" He pointed, and then I saw it too. A pale, glowing figure was just beneath the surface. It was humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its body too thin, and its face was nothing but black, empty eyes and a jagged mouth that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was watching us. I scrambled to my feet, my breath catching in my throat. Nathan was frozen, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The figure moved, circling the boat in slow, deliberate motions. "Nate, we need to go," I said, my voice shaking. But he didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the figure, his face pale and slack. "Nathan!" I grabbed his arm, snapping him out of his trance. He fumbled with the motor, his hands shaking so badly it took him several tries to start it. When the engine finally roared to life, I grabbed the oars and started paddling as fast as I could. But the figure didn't stay beneath the water. As we sped toward the shore, the glow intensified, spreading out around the boat like a halo. Shapes began to emerge from the depths, more figures, all identical to the first, their black eyes fixed on us. They reached for the boat, their skeletal hands breaking the surface. One of them grabbed the edge, pulling the boat down on one side. Nathan screamed, swinging his flashlight like a weapon, but the beam passed right through them. "We're not going to make it," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Keep going," I yelled, my arms burning as I paddled. The shoreline was so close, just a few more feet. But then something cold and slimy wrapped around my ankle. I looked down and saw one of the figures, its long fingers gripping me like a vice. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and a soundless scream echoed in my mind. I kicked frantically, but its grip only tightened. "Nate, help me!" I screamed. He turned, his face twisted in terror, but he didn't move. And then the boat capsized. The water was freezing, and the shock of it knocked the air from my lungs. I thrashed, trying to reach the surface, but the figures were everywhere, their hands pulling me down, their empty eyes staring into mine. Nathan was screaming somewhere above me, but his voice grew fainter as I sank deeper. The glow surrounded me, growing brighter and brighter until it was all I could see. And then nothing. When I woke up, I was lying on the shore, soaked and shivering. The boat was gone. So was Nathan. I stumbled back to the truck, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. I called the police, but they didn't believe me. They said there was no evidence of anyone else at the lake, no boat, no footprints, nothing. They never found Nathan. It's been months since that night, but I can't escape it. I hear the sound of water lapping against the shore in my dreams. I see those black eyes whenever I close my own. And sometimes late at night, I hear a faint knocking at my window, like something wet and cold trying to get in. It was supposed to be a quick overnight camping trip, something simple to clear my head. I had been dealing with a lot, work stress, family drama, and the idea of getting away from everything, even for just one night, sounded perfect. I decided to camp in Black Hollow Woods, a forest about an hour from my hometown. It wasn't too remote, but it was quiet, and I'd heard it had some great trails. The place had a reputation for being creepy, though. Strange noises at night, hikers who'd claimed to feel watched, and in one case, a guy who swore he'd seen someone following him, only to find no one there. But I didn't put much stock in those stories. People love to exaggerate, especially when they're alone in the dark. I packed light, a small tent, some food, a flashlight, and a knife, just in case. I got to the woods just before sunset, parked at the trailhead, and hiked about a mile in. The air was crisp, the trees tall and dense, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the fading sunlight. I found a good spot to set up camp near a small clearing and got my tent pitched just as the last light disappeared. The night was peaceful at first. I sat by a small fire, ate my dinner, and listened to the sounds of the forest, crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. It was exactly what I needed. But then around midnight, I started hearing something else. It was faint at first, a sound like footsteps crunching on leaves. I figured it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, and didn't think much of it. But the sound didn't go away. It circled my campsite, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees, but I didn't see anything. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound calm. No answer. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, just as I was about to sit back down, I heard it again, this time from the opposite direction. It wasn't an animal. I stood there, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, scanning the darkness. My heart was pounding, every muscle in my body tense. "Who's out there?" I shouted, my voice shaking. Still no response. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe the wind or my imagination. But deep down I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., I heard something new. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. It came from the clearing just beyond my tent. I unzipped the flap as quietly as I could and peered out. There was nothing there, at first. Then I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, just barely illuminated by the moonlight, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its arms hanging unnaturally long at its sides. It wasn't moving, just standing there watching. My flashlight was still in the tent, but I didn't dare reach for it. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the figure, willing it to disappear, to be a trick of the shadows. But it didn't move. It just stood there motionless for what felt like hours. Then, without warning, it turned and walked into the trees. I didn't wait to see if it came back. I packed up my things as quickly and quietly as I could, shoving everything into my bag and abandoning the tent. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. The hike back to my car was a blur, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sending me into a panic. When I finally reached the trailhead, I nearly collapsed from relief. But as I unlocked my car and threw my bag into the back seat, I glanced toward the edge of the parking lot. It was there, the same figure, standing in the shadows, just watching. I didn't stick around. I jumped into the car, started the engine, and sped off, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At home, at work, even in crowded places, I'd catch glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye. And then the knocking started. It was faint at first, coming from the walls, the windows, the doors. Always at night. Always in threes. I tried telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the fear get to me. But last night, I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom. I don't know what it wants, or why it's following me. But I know one thing for sure. It's not going to stop.